Record, and I'm recording. Okay, I'm muting you, the room. I'm muting you, Dee. Okay, we're muted. Good morning.
Only you and me.
Okay. Oh, well, good morning, everybody. We're a little tired. Scott's a little more tired. We went to a concert last night in Port Aransas, which was a lot of fun, but and then our dog died this morning of 19 years.
About an hour ago.
About an hour ago, yeah. So it's been
a long night.
Yeah. So, and we have there's Sherry. Just let me admit her. And so, prayers. I was just thinking this morning, I know this is, like I said, our dog died of 19 years this morning, and it's been on Tuesday, it'll be a year since our son died. I mean, it's just, I don't know, anyhow, it's like a week. Anyhow.
You just missed, Cheryl said her best friend.
What did she say? I didn't see. Chat.
Her best friend, Tina.
Oh, Tina's dad. Tina is Cheryl's best friend, and her dad just died. And we will add Tina and her family in our prayers for sure. We also have family, people that have family issues. Laura's back, but keep her in your prayers. Gina is still dealing with lots of family issues, and please keep her in your prayers this week, especially. And then pain, we still have Kelly on, and our daughter, Julie, is in a lot of pain. She has serious tooth infection, can't get into the dentist until Wednesday, and is in serious pain. Continuous prayers for Jim Robbins' brother-in-law, and also Rob and Carol. Rob, who is a mentee of Cindy Ducks and is at a patient at MD Anderson. And before you start the prayers, I listened to a podcast called Nothing is Wasted. And this week's podcast was a gentleman who has 36 years old and has stage 4 terminal cancer and is a minister. And he was talking about what he's learned over the last year. And he was talking about the purpose of prayer. And I thought it was a beautiful insight. The purpose of prayer, he said, is to align ourselves with the story that God is writing in our lives so we can cooperate with God. So,
and he has the right to say that.
He has the right to say that since he is,
what, 36?
36 and 3 sons under the age of 10 and a wife. Yeah.
You didn't say what happened though. They diagnosed.
Oh, he was diagnosed 18 months ago with stage 1 cancer, and they did the surgery and the chemo, and it looked like he was home free. And then 6 months later, so in the last year, he was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal. And he's a pastor of a church in Portland, Oregon, and he is also, his ministry is called 24/7 Prayer. So anyhow, if you have a chance to, if you're into podcasts and you listen, Nothing is Wasted, and it's this week's podcast, and it's just, it's a very good podcast. I made Scott listen to it too.
God, we always remember these ones that ask for prayers, the ones that we know are coming to you in prayer, but they ask for us to join with them. We know that that's part of our purpose. That's part of our gift. We mourn the losses. We mourn the pain that they're in. But we remember We asked for your hand and your guidance. We look at a world that's confusing, and it's hard to ask for everything to get fixed because we understand that it's broken and will be for some time. But in the middle of all these things, we see that you've prepared a place for us, that you've made a way for us, and we're thankful. Help us to see that, remember that, and these ones that we've called out by name, be with them. Amen.
We are in Genesis, and we are in chapter 4 this week, and it's week 4. And we're going to be looking at Cain and Abel. But last week, we talked about God making man and women, and Ish and Isha. And Scott's going to talk a little bit about that before we get into Genesis 4. And just sort of a funny side note, Scott has, in the last couple of years, has basically done the eulogy or officiated in like 3 funerals. And my brother's getting married on May 24th, and he's going to do a wedding. And so he's gone, which I said is much better than another funeral. But also this whole thing on Ish and Isha and husband and wife.
Yeah, there's been, I know sometimes they make a lot out of words, and I think, probably at times it seems like too much. But I want to tell you about this. We didn't do it last week. We talked about creation, and we talked about how the word for man and woman, Ish and Isha, those are also the words that get used for husband and wife. And starting at the very beginning in Genesis, we see over and over through this story where it talks about this one's husband, this one's wife. It is a very simple man and woman. It's understood from context that it's husband and wife, but it's Ish and Isha. But as you go forward, as the Hebrew people, the Jews, begin to intermingle with some other cultures, especially the Canaanite, and that those Canaanite gods that they worship, a strange thing happens. Where does it first start? We agree.
Genesis 20, and let me get that real quick. Another thing. Sorry. Genesis 20.
That's not Abimelech, is it?
Yes, it's Abimelech.
Oh, okay. So let me at least tell you, she's going to read this, but a new word appears for new words for husband and wife. And the word that starts being used for husband is Baal. Some of you will recognize that by its modern pronunciation, Baal, as in the god worship, Baal. Baal is a word that means master or owner. And the husband begins being referred to as Baal. And the wife, that word becomes even frightening to me. It's a form of Baal that literally means one who is owned. And before you jump to any conclusions, we're going to read a few scriptures that sort of illustrate.
So that wasn't God's plan. God's plan was this partnership.
Or you could just skip right to the.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So who was Abimelech?
Abimelech is a king, as the Abraham, as they are migrating, he's worried because his wife is beautiful, and he's worried that somebody's going to kill him to take her. And we can argue about this being, not a good thing to do. We can't argue about it. It's not a good thing. But he tells her to tell people that she's his sister. And so Abimelech, this king, takes her and he's going to take her for a wife. And he has a vision. And it says in the vision, he's told, you've really messed up here. This woman is someone else's wife. This is Abimelech's understanding. It's the first time we ever see this word Baal, used for a wife. And that's Abimelech, this Canaanite king. We don't see it again. I'll let you read the
So that's it. So that is in Genesis 20, verse 3. One night, however, God came to Abimelech in a dream and told him, you are as good as dead because the woman you have taken, for she is a married woman. And like Scott says, the way he hears that, not being part of Abraham's line, but being this Canaanite king,
is under that word Baal, that she's owned by someone. And to me, that's frightening. And yet, we see evidence of that attitude. But we'll skip way ahead. Do you have Solomon? Or are you going to go to Deuteronomy? We next see this. We don't see this again out of the Jewish people until way up in Deuteronomy, when they have moved into the promised land. They're beginning to lay out the law, and it is legalism, and they begin to define things, and they begin to talk about wives like property. Now, some people will say, well, but if it's in the Bible, that means that's the way it is. That doesn't mean that. King David, had a man killed so that he could have his wife. That is not a model for us. It is historical, and we see that it's a bad thing. And so we go to Deuteronomy. I'll let you read this one.
Okay, so these are the rules, first of all, of the rules that man-made rules on what they were going to do if they defeated people. So, and when you go to war against your enemy and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands and you take them captive, if you see a beautiful woman among them and you desire her and want to take her as your wife, then you shall bring her into your house. She must shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothing of her captivity. After she has lived in your house a full month and mourned her father and mother, you may have relations with her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife.
And that word husband is Baal. Be essentially her owner. This is not the way it started. And we're bringing this up because in Genesis, we talked a lot about what we have about creation, but husband and wife were simply Ish and Isha, man and woman, and it's equal. And we talked about how it says that Eve is a helper, but that word is not something that treats her like a sidekick. In fact, it's kind of elevated. That word often gets used to describe the help that God brings to his people. The helper in that context is very much something that is elevated and very much needed. It's not some kind of a put down. Somewhere along the line, they changed. When we were in Israel, we went to Jordan. We had a Jordanian tour guide who mentioned that the Arabic word for a good camel and for a good wife is the same word. Somewhere along the line, this changed, but it wasn't the original plan. And we're going to show you a couple other scriptures, but we're going to show you one that'll hopefully you'll understand. This is not just making a big deal out of words. It's an important sort of change in attitude of the relationship.
So we're going to turn to Proverbs 31, and many of you might have heard, there's always like groups, be a Proverbs 31 wife, that it talks about how you should be a wife. But if you turn to Proverbs 31 and go to verses 10 and 11, it says, a wife of noble character, who can find? She is far more precious than rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and she lacks nothing of value.
This is written by Solomon. And if you remember, Solomon utterly loses his way, and he marries he has however many wives and hundreds of concubines. And a lot of the stuff in his writing, he has this horrible view of women, but that's what Solomon did. And he married women from all these different Canaanite and other religions, and he just lost his way. And you see it reflected in the words that he chooses. Right now, you can go to the internet and find people that will say, see, the Bible proves that the husband is the master of the wife. And they try and justify this. And I'm bringing it up because this is, in Genesis, you see no inference of anything of the sort. This was not the plan. And to kind of illustrate that, do you have Hosea?
I do have those.
So Hosea is a prophet, and he's one of the ones that has his own book.
And he's a later prophet.
He is one of the major prophets. And these are people, these prophets, who have the nerve to stand up and say, "Thus saith the Lord." Prophet literally means to bring a word from God. And Hosea has maybe sometime we'll do Hosea as a study, but he's talking about, or God has talked to him about a time when Israel will return to him. They have left. In fact, the proper terminology is they've gone a whoring after other gods. They have left Yahweh and they are now following these other gods. And he speaks to Hosea and says, tell the people of Israel this. And I want you to listen to this verse especially.
So I'm in Hosea chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband and no longer call me my master. For I will remove from her lips the names of the Baals. No longer will their names be invoked.
What that shows, even though, it may not be immediately apparent, what he says is, in that day, in the day that Israel returns to me, in that day, you will call me Ish, which is the word for husband, and not Baal, which is the other word for husband that means owner. All right? And it shows very clearly that there are two different models here. They will tell you today, if you go look it up, the Hebrew word for husband is Baal. And they say, oh, don't worry about it. It doesn't really mean anything. It does mean something. And we know where it came from. And we understand that it has to do with mastery and ownership. And the reason we're bringing this up is we're finishing up what we've already done in Genesis, that we were not created that way. That was never the intent of the relationship. And it's illustrated in the relationship. God tells one of his prophets, you go tell them that in that day that they come back, you won't call me owner like you do. These gods are your masters and your owners. You'll call me Ish, like a husband, like one that nurtures. And it's an incredible distinction. And I hope that it sort of, as we're leaving that creation part of Genesis, and we talk about man and woman, that there was a model here that husband and wife were Ish and Isha, and not Baal and Baali, I think, the one who is owned. So for whatever that's worth, we see this devolving of relationship with God. And we're about to see the next story of Cain and Abel. And you should recognize some of the things that we see in people around us today. And it's not how we're supposed to be.
And what it reminded me of is it creeped in. It wasn't overnight. It creeped in over a long period of time, that relationship of husband and wife became accepted to be something else in the Old Testament. And things creep into our belief systems now. And we think to ourselves, if we don't go back to the root of what it was, things can creep into our other.
We're going to see some things in Cain and Abel that have crept in to our churches, to our what we're taught.
Okay, so we're in Genesis 4, and we're going to get to Cain and Abel. Chapter 4, verse 1. And Adam had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man, she said. Later, she gave birth to Cain's brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, while Cain was a tiller of the soil. So in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruit of the soil as an offering to the Lord, while Abel brought the best portions of the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but he had no regard for Cain and his offering. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell.
The countenance fell. You can see the anger on him. You look at people, and it's like the horse walks into the bar, and the bartender says to him, "Why the long face?" No, okay. His countenance fell. He has a long face. That's what they're describing. And I don't know about you, but this first portion of the story of Cain and Abel, that Cain was a tiller of the soil. Cain raised crops, and Abel raised animals. He raised livestock. And we were taught that why God was displeased with Cain is because he brought fruits and vegetables instead of animals. Any of you ever been told that? Have you kind of had that pushed at you, that God was dissatisfied with? Do you have something different? I saw you shaking your head. Nobody ever.
I've never heard that.
You never heard it? Is Abel brings the first and the best of his flock as the sacrifice. He brings this to the Lord. And Cain, if you really look, Cain just brings some stuff. He probably brings some leftovers. And it's the heart. It's not the nature of whether it's fruits and vegetables or it's animal. Cain just brings some stuff.
And we always talk about the consistency of the Bible, and all the way to the New Testament when Jesus is telling the parable of the widow who brings just a few coins or one coin, whatever she has available. And that is a better offering than someone who puts in a lot of money in it.
And so we have, even today, I've been in churches, I've heard these sermons where these people who, I don't know how they get ordained, but they teach there must be the death of an animal, right? Cain and Abel prove that. And we can talk about the other sacrifices later. That's not what this is. The point is that what this tells us about Cain and Abel is that Cain brings his best and the first fruits, Abel brings best and first fruits, and Cain just brings some stuff and lays it out. It says God has no regard for it, and Cain gets angry at that. Kind of, how dare you not accept whatever I bring? How dare you not accept me the way I am? And he's angry over it, and his countenance falls, and God speaks to him.
Verse 6, why are you, excuse me, why are you angry, said the Lord to Cain, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you refuse to do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires you, but you must master it.
So what are you angry about? I used to, I've told this before, but our son Peter, I remember he had done something repeatedly, and I told him, if you do it again, you're going to lose your Game Boy. There's going to be a consequence. And he just falls apart. What do what's wrong with Peter? To Mary. And he says, God says he's going to take away my Game Boy. No, Peter, I didn't say I want to take away your Game Boy. I said that there's going to be a consequence if you do things this way. And that's sort of what's going on with Cain. He's, why are you angry, Cain? He says, you don't accept my gift. You don't accept my offering the way it's given. And what he's told, and I don't know how God communicates with people back then or any other time, but he says, if you do what's right, you'll be accepted too. I didn't single you out. You change your heart, and we don't have any problem here. And the indication from what comes next is that Cain is so angered by this idea of not being accepted the same way as Abel. Do you have it?
Yeah. Sorry, I was hoping to something else.
Did you want to talk about that other one? Well, we'll come back.
Yeah, okay. Then Cain said to his, you can answer this, yeah, Peter, First Peter.
So I want you to look at the end. What verse was that? It was
6 and 7.
6 and 7.
But if you refuse to do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires you, but you must master it.
Sin is crouching at your door. If you continue to do this, sin is crouching, and this anger that you have, sin is crouching at your door. It desires you. And we skip over way up in the New Testament to 1 Peter.
1 Peter chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. This is Peter talking, and he says, be sober-minded and alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in your faith and in the knowledge that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of suffering.
It's amazing how similar this is. Thousands of years later, Peter describes sin laying in wait. And he describes the enemy as the way it said. Satan is a word that means enemy, but he says your enemy, the devil, prowls like a lion, like a ravening lion, seeking someone to destroy. And it's you. Okay, he's looking for you. And all the way back in Genesis, talking to Cain, he says, if you keep indulging this anger and resentment, sin is crouching at your door, and it desires you. And he says you have to resist it. It's almost exactly the same thing that Peter teaches thousands of years later.
So we're now on chapter 4, verse 8. Then Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. And the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? I do not know, he answered. Am I my brother's keeper? What have you done? Replied the Lord. The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed and banished from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield its produce to you. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. But Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, this day you have driven me from the face of the earth, and from your face I will be hidden. I will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Not so, replied the Lord. If anyone slays Cain, then Cain will be avenged sevenfold. And the Lord placed a mark on Cain so that no one would kill him. So Cain went forth from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden.
The land of Nod, that word Nod means wandering, and he becomes a wanderer. That's a story for another time. Let's get back to this. Cain is so angry, and he says to his brother has been accepted, his gift has been accepted. Cain's jealous, he's envious, he's angry about it. And he's so angry that rather than look inside himself, rather than listen to this instruction to change your heart, change your behavior, do what's right, he's decided somehow it's Abel's fault. He's to blame for getting all the attention and being the goody two shoes and being the, and you hear this with siblings that will swear that one of the other siblings is the favorite. That one, you always do more for this one than for me. And there are times I'm sure that may be true in families, but I know of a lot of times where if anything, it's the furthest thing from the truth. And actually, we saw a lot of that with Peter. That he just and I worried at times that I was neglecting the other two because he demanded this this attention in a way. But Cain is so angry, he goes out and he strikes his brother and kills him. And you see the same sort of thing, like when it says God comes to Adam in the garden. It says, "Where are you?" He comes and Abel, and he says, "What have you done?" And he says, "Where's your brother Abel?" He says, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I in charge of keeping up with him? Who knows? He's probably out with some sheep." I mean, that attitude of acting like I've still done nothing wrong. There is no contrition in him. And he gets this consequence. You're going to be cast out. You're going to be a wanderer. The ground is not going to produce for you the way that it has. And you see even then Cain saying, "It's too harsh. It's more than I can bear." The amazing thing to me in this is that there is mercy. We tend to look at justice and mercy as being incompatible. If there's mercy, you have to forego justice. And if there's justice, you have to forego mercy. And yet in our scriptures, dealing with God over and over again, we see mercy from the very beginning.
There was a consequence, but then God says, after Cain says this is too harsh, and whoever finds me is going to kill me. The Lord says, "Not so. If anyone slays Cain, then Cain will be avenged sevenfold." And the Lord placed a mark on Cain so that no one would found him would kill him.
There's lots of speculation about the mark and what that entails, and we don't have any clues. We don't know. People make stuff up. We don't know. But apparently word goes out, and somehow you can identify, this. But the idea of not sanctioning more killing, you notice he doesn't strike Cain down for having done this. There is mercy, and there's not death for death in that. And he says, the word will go out that anyone that tries to exact their justice on you, it'll happen to them 7 times as bad. It's an amazing story of human nature, and the fall that began in Eden just continues to escalate. You see that. That's why I wanted to bring up the idea of Ish and Isha, because you see this continual degeneration of relationships. It's part of what sin is. It is part of the progression, and we see this fall just continue to escalate after the original acceptance of good, this knowledge of good and evil.
So now we're on chapter 4, verse 17. And Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. Then Cain built a city and named it after his son Enoch.
Can we pause for a second? Cain's become a wanderer, right? Nomad. And there are nomadic people even today in Israel. We encountered them, and they literally wander around the countryside. They are nomads. A lot of them tend goats even not so much sheep as goats. But he becomes a nomad. But notice it says that he takes a wife. That's Isha. That's not Baal. That's not Baali. He takes a wife from where? He's already been sent away. All this speculation of did everybody come from Adam and Eve? This is early in the game. And he has someone he goes out east of where they began, what we say Eden. He's a wonder, and there are people there because there's someone to be his wife. And I'm sorry, we can talk about what that means, but what it says is what it says. And he's out away from his people, his family, and there is someone there to marry. So I think you have to conclude there were more people, right? There are people who will still tell this story, and it just doesn't say that. I'm sorry, it just doesn't say it. So he takes a wife, has a son that they named Enoch, and he even names a city after him. Well, you don't build a city for three people, Cain, his wife, and their son. There are other people, but there's another person named Enoch in the Bible, and these names get used a lot, and I don't know why that sits so hard with people. We have two people in this room named Jack, right? Nobody seems to struggle with that. The fact that there are two people in Genesis named Enoch is just not a big stretch. And I'm trying to remember if Enoch, I think, means mighty, strong, mighty one. But anyway, we start getting told about the generations of Cain. And some of it, we're not going to go through all the generations of everybody because I'll lose every single one of you in the process. But we'll talk a little bit.
And he'd have to correct me on every single pronunciation.
Oh yeah, it caused trouble between us because she'd mispronounce them and I'd correct her, and then we just can't do that.
But we're going to do some of it anyhow. Verse 18. Now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methusael, and Methusael was the father of Lamech. And Lamech married two women, one named Adah and the other Zillah.
This is the first reference we have to marrying multiple wives, by the way. Don't know what the custom was where they were. One thing I want to bring out, if you look at biblical names, and you see two of them there in this first part, Mehujael and Methusael, if you see a name that ends in the letters EL and L, almost 100% of the time, that's God. L is God. And so the name is some reference that acknowledges God in the process. So Mehujael means something along the lines of shining one of God, right? And it's that way with all of these names. Israel, Ezekiel, they all end in L, and it is all some reference to and people would name their children that because they wanted them to be reminded of a relationship with God.
Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and raise livestock. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play the harp and flute. And Zillah gave birth to Tubal, Cain, a forger of every implement of bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal was Naamah.
Now it talks about this guy being the father of those who raise cattle or
dwell in tents and raise
livestock. And there are people who say this is clearly, you can see from that, this is just a myth. This is mythology. Because look, this guy is the father of tent dweller, cattle raiser. And this guy's the father of people who play musical instruments. That is not an uncommon term. Somebody who gets associated with something, especially in Hebrew, they'll refer to them. They'll refer to them as the father of people who live in this area. there's someone we saw just recently that's referred to as the father of AI, artificial intelligence. We don't balk at that. We don't say that he's a myth. It's not trying to say that nobody ever thought of raising cattle or living in tents. Nobody ever played an instrument before, but these descendants became known for these abilities, and people said this is the father of musicians and those who play musical instruments. It's not that complicated.
Now remember, Lamech,
Yeah.
Lamech had two wives. And so in verse 23, it says, Then Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have slain a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold.
So at first that sounds confusing. It's really not. That was his father was Cain, right? Or was this a grandson? This is a grandson.
Yeah.
His grandfather is well known, killed a man. And there is this promise that anybody who messes with Cain will be avenged sevenfold. In this guy's mind, that makes him sort of mighty. He's taking the murder that Cain committed and one-upping it. He says, I killed a man for wounding me. I killed him. And let me tell you, if you think Cain is bad because he'll be avenged sevenfold, I'll be avenged 77-fold. And he's literally puffed up and bragging. He has taken this idea of murder and carried it to a new level. And now it's like this is an important, tough thing that he is. That's why this is in here. Once again, the falling away just continues to grow. And we see what's in people's minds so much that they actually think that this doing violence is something they need to brag about. It's kind of like you see people going around with these, and I don't want to hit everybody who has a big giant pit bull, but some people can't keep big giant pit bulls to show how tough they are and how dangerous they are. And this idea of being dangerous, they value. This is the same thing going on with Lamech, with this descendant of Cain.
Well, and also remember that this is the idea that God gave Cain mercy. He said, you still have a chance to change your heart. And everybody's aware that God gave Cain this mercy. And Lamech, and it's several generations later, it was actually his great-great-grandfather, I think, he's aware of that. And he is saying, look, I did it. I killed two people already. And Cain was avenged sevenfold. I'll be avenged 77-fold. And you go to the New Testament where God is, people say, well, if I have been saved because Christ died for my sins, can I keep sinning?
Here's Cain. He killed a man, and instead of being zapped and instant retribution, he gets mercy. And so what some people take from that, it's an okay thing to do. That's where they've gotten in just a few generations.
Verse 25, and Adam again had relations with his wife, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another seed in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. And to Seth also a son was born, and his name was Enosh. At that time, men began to call upon the name of the Lord.
What they're saying is that they begin to worship in the way that we recognize worshiping Yahweh, worshiping El. That very early on, the practice of worship to call upon the name of the Lord. It's not that they weren't aware. Clearly, we have references to that, but it was very early on in this group where they began a formal worship. They began to call upon the name of the Lord. It's just a point of information, I think.
Go on to chapter 5, and we're just going to read the first 2 verses first. And remember, Scott had talked about how the story of Adam and Eve, the first man, or not the first man, the man Adam, and the woman Eve, that story is that we'll say is a lineage all the way to Christ.
This is our story. This is the story of this entire book.
So this emphasizes that. At the beginning of chapter 5, it says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam in the day that God created man. He made him in his own likeness. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them. In the day they were created, he called them man." Now, the interesting thing about this is the word Adam. So the first sentence, this is the book of the generation of Adam. That word?
It's capitalized, and it has come to also be used as this man's name. And there's nothing wrong with that. Adam just means man. And you see the simplicity at the beginning. And it's not because they don't know, they're not simple-minded. But it just has to do, like I said, with the relationship and who everyone is. And it reiterates, this is the story of the generations of Adam. It's what we told you from week 1, that's what's going on here. This lineage, there's a story that begins here and ends in Revelation. And in between, we have Messiah, right? It's a one contiguous story. And they count the generations of Adam, now we use it as a name, for a purpose, but this is where the story begins.
And that second sentence, in the day that God created man, that word man and Adam are the same word, correct?
Correct.
So it could say, this is the book of the generations of man in the day that God created man. He made him in his own likeness. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them. And in the day they were created, he called them man. And that, again, is the same word as Adam. All of those words are all 3 uses of Adam, man, and man are the same word.
Adam is much more often mankind. If it's a single man, we're really zeroed in on a person. It's each. That's that same word for husband. And we get some clues in the words, just like what we read in Hosea, where he says, in that day, you'll call me Ish and not Baal, not Baal. It's not splitting hairs to look at these words. You don't use certain words accidentally. You don't say, well, let's see, I'm either going to call the husband Ish, I'm going to call him Baal. No, when you use the word Baal, you're giving up intention. You choose that word. And this idea of calling him man, this is mankind.
Verse 3, when Adam was 130 years old, he had a son in his own likeness, after his own image, and he named him Seth. And after he had become the father of Seth, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. So Adam lived a total of 930 years, and then he died.
Anybody disturbed by that? I'll look at home. Anybody disturbed by living 930 years? I would hope pretty much everyone is. And there are people who speculate, well, these aren't years the way we reckon years, and they're seasons, and they're this and they're that. I don't know. I don't think so.
Because we'll see something later on.
We're going to see something coming up in the next little bit that indicates these people lived that long. And whether you kind of like the sound of it or not, one thing, though, it does talk about this birth of Seth. Remember, they had 2 sons, and now they have none, because one is dead and one's been sent away. They're empty nesters. So when they have Seth, and they think Seth means one that's something that's been granted, that's been given. We've been given another son. Anyway, he lives then another 800 years.
Yeah. Then it goes on with a whole bunch of names, and we're not going. You can read the rest of 5. I'm going to skip over to 21 because and these people lived 815 years, 910 years. I mean, you can go through all this. Then it says, when Enosh, I'm on verse chapter 5. Enoch, I'm sorry, Enoch. I'm in chapter 5, verse 21. When Enoch was 65 years old, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he had become the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. So Enoch lived a total of 365 years.
Go for the next one.
Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more because God had taken him away.
That's all the clue we get about Enoch. You have to read in those few words. But it says he walked with God 365 years.
Yes.
And then he was no more. And if you read the Hebrew, it literally just says, and then he wasn't. God took him. We take that to mean that God literally pulled him out of this world. And it gets referenced in the New Testament. I think that's what in Hebrews. I think that's what Mary is digging for.
Yeah, I didn't mark it here.
That's all right.
No, I got to look at it. Just, and that's in so it's
we really do prepare for this.
Hebrews 11:15. This one has a lot of different ones. 11:15. Hebrews 11:15. Where we believe Paul wrote Hebrews, and he is saying, let me make sure I have this right. Yes. Now those who say such things show that they were seeking a country of their own. That does not look like the right reference. Just a second. Let me make sure. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Let's just.
Oh, it's 11:5. I'm sorry. It's 11:5. And this chapter 11 of Hebrews is considered the faith chapter. And Paul talks about a lot of people who have faith. And it says in chapter 11, verse 5, by faith, Enoch was taken up so that he did not see death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God.
This is one of those kind of amazing stories. We've already had someone named Enoch, and that confuses a lot of people because Enoch is Cain's son, and it doesn't seem like somebody like this would be born to Cain. Well, he wasn't.
This one was born in Seth's line.
In Seth's line. They reuse the name, and it's okay to do. But the idea that he was around for 365 years, which makes him a relative youngster in this group, and it just says that, and then he wasn't. He was no more because God took him. There is a book of Enoch that is referenced in the New Testament. It's referenced in Jude, I believe, the book of Jude, and it's lost. If you ever run down that rabbit hole, there are people who have written a book of Enoch, 2 or 3 of them, and they're not real. We really don't know much today about what was in the book of Enoch, but it's referenced in the New Testament. And it also, because Paul says that Enoch was taken directly by God. That was their understanding. I'm going with it. The scriptures themselves don't exactly say that, but they could say it. But since Paul's understanding all that time ago, that apparently is what everyone understood that to mean. Enoch walked with God, and God saw fit to just bring him to him.
And that's why we made sure we talked about that, because people will have heard that Enoch didn't die.
And it's 950 something?
I'm going to read this one section.
Oh.
Yeah. When Methuselah was 187 years old, he became the father of Lamech. And after he had become the father of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had other sons and daughters. So Methuselah lived a total of 969 years, and then he died. When Lamech was 182 years old, he had a son, and he named him Noah, saying, "May this one comfort us in labor and toil of your hands, caused by the ground that the Lord has cursed. And after he became the father of Noah, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. So Lamech lived a total of 777 years, and then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Japheth, yeah.
Japheth.
They call it Japheth because we're Americans. He's Japheth. There he is. We'll give a little preview because we got to wrap it up. It's
Right.
9:57 and I'm tired. There's a reference coming up. It'll be here next week where it says that God says, my patience is sort of running out. I'm not going to continue to indulge you. And he shortens people's lives.
I'm just gonna read the one verse. It's in 6:3, so it's beginning of next week. It says, "So the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days shall be 120 years." So there's all these long years, and then God says we're going to shorten. And I told Scott, it's sort of funny if you listen to all these longevity doctors now. They say that our bodies are made to live 120 years. And if you go back to Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, God said after all these generations of these people living 900 and 700 years, he says,
and I don't know whether that's amazing or just
I
something
thought it was
people
amazing.
say, but
I'm going to say it's amazing.
But what we here, I'm just going to speculate. Here, I'm just going to throw something out to consider. This line, this lineage that begins in Genesis, these are people who came from Eden, wherever Eden was, and they are living an unnaturally long lifetime. And they are marrying with, having children with other people outside of that line. But we're seeing this unnatural lifespan of the ones who came out of Eden. Well, it doesn't, strike me as that odd. I mean, this is a strange thing we're being told. And then at some point, God says, I'm not going to contend. My spirit is not going to contend with man forever. He's mortal, and he shortens this. No, so whatever it is that happens in Eden, whatever it is that begins there, we appear to be being shown that those people, those descendants, live longer. There appear to have been other people because they married someone and they, it looks like, did not. And that's also going to come up in another context next week. Now we try and understand every detail. We think we're entitled to know exactly every detail, rather than understand you've left us enough. You've told us the parts that show us how to live with you, how to seek you, how to look for your way. We're told that we're created in your image, and we act like that's not enough. We have to know everything. If we knew everything, I think we couldn't contain it. But I'm always grateful for the parts and the strange consistency that I see, even when I don't necessarily understand how it worked. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for the assurance that I can have to go out and face the world that I look at. And my prayer today is that these things that seem odd to us, that we can have the faith and the comfort to not decide that it's not real. There's so much that we don't understand in this world that's not even in our scriptures. Give us that courage to have faith and to look for the parts of you that lead us to your will. Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
I
y'all.
hope you all have nice weather like we do today.
We're seeing Gypsy with Annie McDowell.
Oh,
Oh,
she-
wow.
Oh my
she's
goodness.
showing them the different the different musicals she sings. Cheryl just came back from New York to going to a musical with her daughter, and Terry's going with her daughter to see 4 musicals. So
I was worried for a minute somebody was seeing that in what we said today. And I was struggling to understand how, but
I had to, who you just say. You guys have a great week.
Everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Good.